What up, what up? I'm back at it again with another video. For today's video, I'm going to be talking about toxic positivity, and I'm going to be reacting to some toxic positivity TikToks. Before I get into the video, just to let you know, I do have timestamps on this video in case you want to skip ahead. And also, if you could smash that thumbs up button for me, it helps the channel a lot, and I'm trying to get this video to 50 likes. So if you've been a long-time subscriber, you've heard me talk about toxic positivity on this channel. But I think I haven't really properly defined it. I just kind of have like referenced it like, toxic positivity, stay away from that. So today I kind of wanted to define it and also react to some TikToks. Toxic positivity is kind of a term that's been around for a while, and a lot of people are unsure as to like the origins of it and like who's the first person who coined it or said it. But basically, it's the idea that you should always put a positive spin on everything. You should always have like a positive mindset regardless of how much pain you're in, regardless of your circumstances, and regardless of the reality of what you actually are feeling. A lot of times it's used in a way to dismiss what you are feeling, and a lot of times in this culture and this society, we praise emotions that we deem positive and we discourage and punish emotions that we view as negative. Whereas if you speak to a lot of like psychologists and people in like the mental health world, they'll actually tell you that, you know, like emotions are not like positive or negative. A lot of times what happens is like emotions in either excess or in deficit is what kind of like may have like a negative impact on our world or how we communicate with others. So for example, anger is not a negative or bad emotion. Oftentimes, if you let things go unsaid for a really long time, it can become volatile, it can become explosive because it is in excess. And so of course it will one day like explode. And so an explosive emotion is going to probably cause some damage to relationships and might cause you to do things that you wouldn't normally do. So that's kind of a little bit of me nerding out on like toxic positivity and some mental health terms and things. Okay, so I'm gonna get into my first video. So yeah, I'm on TikTok and I'm just using the tag positive mindset as like a hashtag to search for videos that come up, and I'm just kind of scrolling through and just kind of seeing what comes up. So yeah, let's do this. What does that mean? Okay, let's watch this one. I no longer chase anything or anyone. I work for what I want and remain patient while going after it. I do not have the energy to chase what is not for me. Life is too short for me to run miles for people who don't take steps for me. That's actually not so bad. I mean, I would need more specifics, but that's not so bad. Not so bad. I no longer chase anyone or anything. Define chase. That is really, I just need clarity on that, because with goals and stuff like that, you do need to be persistent. Not necessarily chase it, but you do need to be persistent. And then even with relationships and with people, you might define something as like, oh, I'm chasing them. But that might be like some of your stuff versus like actually like being like consistent and like it be a two-way street. And then I don't know, like I think that's also complicated too, because with like men and women pairings, oftentimes like the guy is expected to like be the one that's like initiating things, and like if that doesn't work for you, that doesn't work for you, and like that makes sense because in general that don't really work for me. But this is not so bad. I've seen worse. Let's keep going.
Panoramic dish, ooh, panoramic. I like light skins, what are dark skins? Bitch, gonna really put that arch in. Ain't no slowing down, we getting started. Too much money in my face, it didn't turn me cold. Panoramic dish, ooh.
This is kind of cute. I kind of like that. I don't know. I kind of like it. Anyway, simple trick for positive mindset.
Here's a trick for you to get yourself into a good and positive mindset. Wake up and do a daily routine that gets you into a good mood. It could be a light workout or gratitude journaling or yoga or meditation. Fake it till you make it, because it is far easier to act your way into a new way of thinking than thinking your way into a new way of acting.
Okay, so this is a pretty good example. It feels helpful, and to some people this could be helpful, but to some people this could be really hurtful, because She talked about faking it till you make it. And that's what like is at the core of toxic positivity. It's like stuffing down what you actually feel to attain like this look of happiness. Things like journaling and yoga and like having a routine can be really helpful and can be really great for your mental health. There are a lot of people who suffer from depression who literally cannot get out of bed. And videos like this can make them feel like they are a failure and like they just aren't doing the steps. They aren't tricking themselves enough. They aren't working their brains hard enough. And so videos like this just kind of show me that a lot of people don't know a lot about mental illnesses and neurodiversity, and that doesn't work for everybody, and also that is like really toxic when you have this relationship with your emotions where you're not just like accepting your emotions as they come, but you're like trying to force your emotions to be a particular kind of thing. That is what's toxic. This is another one. It's all so simple. It's just so easy. It's all up to you. You just gotta switch your perspective and you've just gotta change the way you look at life. And then everything is just so easy and rosy and perfect. Can we just break this down a little bit though? 2 months of intense focus. It's been impossible for me to focus since the beginning of the pandemic. I've talked a lot about this on Twitter, about how I don't even recognize who I am. I made a video about this, about how difficult it's been for me to read since the start of the pandemic and how hard it is, because that was like a big part of my identity, like learning. I haven't been able to really write anything, and I am a writer. I'm an author. Like writing is like what I do also for work, and I haven't been able to focus. Self-care. So that is a word that is a word that has been misused in the last couple of years. Self-care is something that started out of abolitionist circles and like activist circles, and the term was used for people who were constantly going to protests, and it was something for them to do to decompress after a long day of protesting or a long day of like political engagement. It was something that they needed to do to replenish themselves so that they could go on to do that work, so that they wouldn't experience like political burnout. And of course, like, you know, capitalism heard that and was like, self-care, okay, how can we sell people products? How can we get people doing more bath bombs and like doing face masks and stuff? And it just kind of like removes it out of its original context. Why not start now? And of course, you know, he has his own like services that he's offering, and all you gotta do is just DM him and then your life can change in 2 months. I think I'm gonna pass.
I can't go. I have anxiety. What do you mean you have anxiety? You mean you feel anxious? Well, yeah, I feel anxious because I have anxiety. I mean, you say that like you have the flu. Well, it is. I mean, I can't control having the flu, and I can't control having anxiety. Oh, sure. I mean, you can't control it, but just because you feel anxious doesn't mean you can't do something, right? Like go with you? Right, like go with me. I mean, how do you expect to not feel anxious if you are telling yourself that you have anxiety and you keep avoiding anything that makes you anxious? I guess so. You're teaching your body that there's something to be anxious about. So, will you go with me now?
Whoa. Okay. There's a lot going on in this video. The first thing I will say is a lot of times people will hear about a particular mental illness or hear about a particular term, and something about it resonates, and they will now use that term and say, oh yeah, I have this thing, without like a medical diagnosis. And so that has become like a really big, you know, issue for a lot of people involved in like mental wellness and stuff. And also misusing words. For example, a very commonly misused word are things like accountability, are things like harm reduction, and even self-care. When you remove words or out of their original context, there's like a lot of loss that's happening, and also you don't know what you're talking about. So I do think that a lot of times people say like, oh, I have this thing. And I mean, you know your body, you know your experience. If you know that like, oh, nah, I have anxiety, you have anxiety then. But at the same time, I do recognize that a lot of times people kind of throw around these like buzzwords. They do that a lot with like everything. And a lot of times removing it from like its original like meaning, which took years of study. This takes like a diagnosis, and you have to like hit these like levels, or like there's a lot that kind of goes into like a diagnosis, right? But like I said, a lot of people know their own body and know their own experience. This is toxic positivity, and this is ableism, what we're witnessing. Sometimes if you have a therapist who does not get it, or who is really not the best fit for you, they will use CBT, they will use this line of thinking, they will use these talking points to either minimize or shut conversations down, or to blame you for what you're experiencing, instead of coming at it from a place of understanding and really like hearing what you're saying. You're saying that large crowds make you anxious. I hear you. So it makes you not want to go to large crowds. I hear you. It impedes maybe your day-to-day life. Maybe you can't work at certain places, or you can't work at all. I really hear you. Can we talk about some of the earliest times you remember feeling anxious in a large crowd? Oh, well, there was this one time I was in a large crowd and someone threw a bottle at the back of my head and it shattered and I got a concussion and then I had to go to the hospital. That's like traumatic. I can see why you experience anxiety in crowds. And that's just one example. That's not everybody's experience. Everybody doesn't have a story where something traumatic happened to them in a large crowd. But what I'm trying to get at is that when you approach it from a place of like understanding and like really curiosity and investigation, or maybe there is something else going on. But when you approach situations like, oh, your anxiety is something that I have to fix because I need you to go back to work because you're a little worker bee and you can't go to work because you have anxiety. It's your fault. It's because you are making yourself anxious. You're thinking that you're making yourself anxious. You're saying, oh, I have anxiety, so it's making you more anxious. And that is toxic positivity, like kind of at its worst, especially if this person actually does experience anxiety. Things like this make them way worse because now you're attaching guilt to whatever emotions you're feeling and you're blaming yourself. So now it's shame. That's like a cocktail and a recipe for a disaster. But yeah, you see this all the time. It is very common in kind of like the sector of YouTube that I kind of like sort of am in, which is like mental wellness and stuff like that. It's always this pressure to perform positivity, to perform smiles. To be honest, I really don't feel very well right now. I am feeling extremely overwhelmed in my personal life. And on top of that, you know, racial injustice continues to be a pillar of this country. Global anti-blackness is real. And these are things that have always kind of plagued me, have always kind of contributed to my depression. Anti-LGBT sentiment is rampant throughout major religions. It's rampant throughout communities that are not religious. It is a lot. I do not always feel good. I oftentimes get a lot of pushback because of that. I think back to like before the pandemic when I was working as a bartender, and sometimes people, whether they were my coworkers or whether they were patrons, they would ask me like, oh, hey, how are you? And I'll be like, I'm okay. How are you? And you know, like people don't like that. People don't like to hear that. People don't like to hear that like you're not like good. Like, oh, I'm good or I'm well. No, I'm not. I'm okay. I'm here, I'm surviving, and I'm doing everything I know how to do. Been to therapy, I'm working out, like for my mental health, and like I'm doing all the things, and I'm still just okay. I'm here today. I'm not good, I'm not well, I'm okay. And that makes people so uncomfortable when you don't just like respond with the like, oh, I'm good, and that's across genders. That is really not my biggest priority. Someone asked me how I feel, and I was honest about how I felt. I'm okay. And yeah, most days I'm not like good or great. Most days I'm okay. Some days I'm like, oh wow, I'm really good, I'm really happy. And some days I'm really, really, really sad. And most days I'm just like, I'm okay. Yeah, that's my normal. And so like toxic positivity wants you to say that you're good, regardless of things going on in your personal life, regardless of anything. Like capitalism and people want you to perform happiness. And I don't, no, 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 no. And it was annoying because it wasn't like people were like genuinely concerned most times, or even if they were genuinely concerned, it always kind of felt a bit intrusive. A lot of times they would just interrogate me like, oh, you're just okay? Yes, I'm just okay. And I don't know that I want strangers to like necessarily figure out why I'm just okay. I think one of the problems I have is that greeting is not just a greeting. It's not just like, oh, hello, good afternoon, good morning. To me, that's just a greeting. But that is a question, like how are you is a question. And I know that's just a greeting or that's how people use it. But I guess the problem for me is that it's not just a greeting. It is an actual inquiry. How are you? I'm okay. And yeah, that upsets people a lot. I think that if you don't want to know how someone is doing, and if you don't have the capacity to actually receive an answer that you weren't expecting, that you really should not ask that question. So at the start of the pandemic, we saw toxic positivity at its height. So we saw people tweeting and Instagramming and YouTubing about how this was going to be a wonderful 2-week vacation, and how if you don't come out of this pandemic learning a new instrument or with a new skill or with a new business, then you wasted your time and you're a failure. And if you didn't learn how to speak Spanish and Russian and Igbo and Yoruba, then, you know, it's just, what are you doing? What'd you do with your pandemic time? That is a form of toxic positivity throughout this pandemic. The death toll is like, that is something that is really hard to really wrap your mind around. The sheer gravity and magnitude of how many people have lost their lives in this pandemic. The way that we've seen the government mishandle things. We've seen the racism throughout this entire pandemic. We've seen it blamed on Asians and Asian communities, Asian American communities. That is traumatic. The abrupt stop and end to our day-to-day routine. That is traumatic. So to act as though this was just a vacation, or to act as though you are a failure if you don't come out of this pandemic as the next Mozart, is toxic positivity. That's the video. That was kind of fun. I don't know how y'all feel about it, but I had a good time doing this. Please let me know what you think about this in the comment section below, and leave me some hearts because it really helps the channel. If you would like to buy me a cup of coffee, you can do so at my CashApp or my Venmo, which is right down in the description box below. And I will see you guys next time. Peace.